Crossroads. My name is Lenny. I'm the director of Capstone Climbing and Adventure, a ministry that was birthed and supported by Crossroads, and so we say thank you for your continued support. I'm excited to be with you. I told the first service this, I'll go ahead and tell you guys. One thing that I do, I have mixed feelings about preaching because oftentimes when Beachy or Lowell call me to preach, I've begun to notice that a lot of times me preaching is actually free therapy for me. Like most of the time it's me kind of sharing with you what God is dealing with in my heart. And so when this date came available, I kind of went, ooh, this is going to probably be painful because I knew that the Lord was going to be dealing with me on some stuff. And so a lot of this is just kind of me talking through with you some of the things that the Lord has revealed to me about my own heart over these last few months. And although it's been painful, it's also been beautiful. So please bear with me because, again, this is kind of a work in progress. So I want to start off by, first of all, confessing that I titled this message Sweet Tea and Apple Pie. And I need to confess first and foremost that I married a Northerner. And I did that because God loves Northerners and they need to be saved and brought into the fold. And so I married one because she needed to be saved. So anyway, no, my wife Katie, who's sitting in the back, is from Connecticut. And so when we got married, there were a few things that I needed to educate her on. So first of all, I need to educate her on what grits were, all right, and how grits are amazing. They're a gift from God, and we should all eat them. Right, that they're wonderful. Second thing is that my wife was never fixing to do anything, so I needed to educate her about how we're fixing to go to the store, we're fixing to go to the movies, and what fixing to was. My wife did not reckon, she supposed, and so I had to say, no, we reckon something is correct, or I reckon I would like to do that, or whatever. I don't suppose anything, right? I reckon. And then the last thing is that we do not need to refer to tea as sweet tea. It's just simply tea. I'm not sure what that stuff is that you serve up north is, but it's not tea, okay? It's something, but it's not tea. Here in the South, we have tea, but we call it sweet tea so that Northerners know what it is, all right? So as I began to enter this season, and so understand that a lot of this is just kind of over the last year, our organization, my family, me personally, we've kind of been going through some transitions and making some changes and some decisions and kind of realigning and moving back into our mission. And so we've had to make some choices over the last 12 months, and some of those have been extremely painful. We've made some organizational decisions that we had to navigate, and then again, some personal decisions. I had to accept some responsibility. I had to begin to recognize some things about myself. And all of that kind of started coming to a head about 2 months ago. And so as I began this journey, the Lord took me to a passage that I really wasn't sure where he was going with it. And we'll talk about it in just a minute. It's the woman at the well and Jesus' interaction with her. And I really began to ask the Lord, hey, why this passage? Why this section? And honestly, sweet tea kind of came to mind. And I kept thinking about tea. And I was like, what does tea have to do with it? And so one of the things that our organization does is we manage a retreat center. And so especially this time of year, we have people there 24/7. And so twice a day for lunch and dinner, we make sweet tea. And we make sweet tea by doing two things. One, we take tea bags and we run the water through there, and we wind up with this what most people call unsweetened tea. It's actually this very brown, bitter water. Why anybody would drink it, I have no idea, but it's this brown, bitter water, okay? And then the next thing you do is you mix this clear liquid, which is water that we've melted sugar in. And you mix the two of them together, and out comes this amazing sweet tea, which is wonderful to drink in the shade in the hot weather under the tree, and it makes this very refreshing drink. As long as you marry the two of them together. Separate, what you wind up with is only half of what you need, right? You wind up with this very brown, bitter water, or you wind up with this very clear, sweet liquid that's almost so sweet that it's not drinkable, But when you marry the two of them together, the bitterness kind of offsets the sweetness, and the sweetness kind of tampers the bitterness, and you wind up with sweet tea. And so the Lord said, I'm going to take you on this journey through this passage, and I want you to keep that in mind, because that's really what I'm beginning to teach you, Lenny, is that there's going to be some things about this that are going to be a little bit bitter and difficult, and there's going to be some things that are going to be very sweet and gentle, but the two of them combined is what's going to be important. It's not one or the other. So he and I began this journey on this passage, and it's been interesting to me. There's no telling how many times I've read it. Even I said this first service, and it happened again. So first service, I read it, and I saw something that I haven't seen. And then even during worship just a minute ago, I read something, and I noticed a word that I had not noticed the entire time I read it. And I'm not kidding. I've probably read this maybe close to 1,000 times in the last 2 months. So in John 4, starting in verse 1, I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. I'm going to let Travis have it up on the screen. But we have this story where Jesus finds himself in Judea, and he is going to be going from Judea to Galilee. And he's going to be doing that because there's something that occurs that causes him to make the decision to transition from where he's at to a different location. So when I first started reading this, I noticed that Jesus makes this decision because it says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although the fact is that it was actually the disciples that were doing it. And that kind of stuck out to me. And I was like, okay, Lord, why did you open with that? And the Lord reminded me, he said, oftentimes, so first of all, he reminded me that that's not my nature. That actually that's very counterintuitive to my nature. That when Jesus learned that he was gaining and that he was growing and that people were beginning to hear about him and he was gaining in popularity and he was gaining in fame, Jesus chose to leave the position he was at and retreat from that. And I need to confess with you, that's not my nature. My nature is just the opposite. My nature is when our organization or when what we're doing or our successes are gaining in popularity and we're increasing in what we do, I'm drawn towards that. So much so that I had to be honest with myself that the season I found myself in was because it started with that very nature. And it started with a decision that we made about a year ago, despite the fact that I was surrounded with a group of people who cautioned me about a decision, and I was going, no, these are open doors. This is a great opportunity for us. This is what we need to pursue. This is what we need to do. And I was so passionate and so convinced that I convinced those around me that that's what we needed to do. And I did that for a couple reasons, and one of them Jesus even reveals here. Number one, I did that because I'm prideful. I did that because the idea that the organization that we were stewarding, that God had called us to plant, that organization was growing and gaining and all these doors were being opened, that we had an opportunity to go and do that was very attractive to me. The funding and the open doors and the possibilities. And the other reason I did that is because I knew that if we didn't do that, the alternative would be more difficult. So the first lesson I've learned is that God has revealed to me that oftentimes the right choice is also the hardest choice. And that when I pursue my fame and my glory, there's a cost for that. So Jesus decides to retreat from where he's at to Galilee. Now, the only way that he can get there is to go through Samaria. To give you a little bit of context in that, the Jews and the Samaritans were not friendly at all. And this was extremely counterintuitive to what the Jews would do. They avoided Samaria at all cost. It was dangerous for them to be there. They as a culture did not appreciate, they despised one another. The Jews viewed them as unclean, ungodly, and people to be avoided. And Jesus found himself in a position where the only way he can go from where he's at to where he's being called to is to pass through this one place that ordinarily we would avoid at all cost. Again, reminding me that oftentimes the right thing is also the hardest thing. But nonetheless, Jesus makes his decision and he goes there. And he arrives at this well, and he arrives there in the heat of the day. And it says that Jesus was tired and that he was thirsty. And I want to remind us today that Jesus, being fully God and fully man, understands the condition of our heart. He understands what it's like to be tired. He understands what it's like to feel pressure. He understands what it's like to face adversity. But he found himself there in the heat of the day. And there he finds a woman at the well. Now, it's interesting because this woman would have only really been at the well in the middle of the day for one reason, and that is that she's avoiding the crowds. Because the well would have been like what we have as a modern day water cooler, right? So typically, culturally, you would have gathered around the well. But you would have mainly done it in the morning or in the afternoon when it was the cool part of the day. If any of you have ever been on any of our African mission trips from Crossroads, you've probably experienced some of this. I know in Kenya, typically by the middle of the day, it's up to about 115 degrees. So if they're going to go and get water, they're going to have to do it in the morning, usually right at sunrise when it's cool, because they're going to have to carry that water a significant distance. So you want to do it while it's cool. You wouldn't do it in the middle of the day. And typically that's a good time in the mornings while everybody's gathered around to kind of talk through what's going to be going on for the day. Who's going to be moving their herds where? Who's going to be tending to this? Who's going to be doing that? So it kind of becomes the social gathering, the community meeting, if you will. End of the day, the same thing would have happened. It would have been kind of when they talked through the day, what happened, the events. And so you would go to the well in the mornings and in the evenings for two reasons. One, to fetch water in the cool of the day. Two, to get brought up to speed on what was going on. If you're there in the middle of the day, you are avoiding people. You're avoiding your culture. And a little bit later in the story, we're going to find out exactly what was going on with her. But I'll go ahead and tell you now, there was definitely a condition in her heart that would have prompted her to be shamed by the community and to want to avoid the community. And the Lord reminded me how oftentimes we do the same thing. We hide in the heat of the day. And here's the reason we do that is because I don't want you to know my unrighteousness and my sinfulness. So I'm going to hide it from you. I'm going to avoid circumstances that are going to expose who I am, or I'm going to avoid circumstances that are going to hold me accountable to those things. But it's always more costly for you and I when I do that, because the only way we can truly do that is to hide out in the heat of the day. Now, I mowed my yard yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a heat index of 105, and let me tell you, the heat of the day is miserable. It's a miserable place to be hiding. But some of you are there too. Now here's what's interesting. Jesus found himself there at the well at the middle of the day, talking to a woman that he should have never been talking to, right? Culturally should have never been talking to. But he's willing to meet her there in the middle of the day because he knew that the only hope she had of overcoming her shame was him. Was if he met her where she was hiding. And the only person that could overcome that is the very person that she's talking to. And Jesus asked her for a drink of water. I too found that very interesting. I found it very interesting that in the midst of her sin, in the midst of her hiding, in the midst of her shame, in the midst of all the circumstances going on, Jesus does two things. One, he engages her and he invites her into conversation. And the second thing is he invites and offers her an opportunity to serve him. I don't know where you're at in your heart right now, but I'm telling you that Jesus is offering you an opportunity to serve him. He is inviting you into an opportunity to be in relationship with him. He's inviting you to engage him. He's inviting you to engage this body. You're here for a reason. And maybe you're in the heat of your day right now. Maybe you've got stuff going on in your life that no one else knows about because you've been able to hide it and you're in the heat of the day. But I'm telling you, you're here because Jesus is inviting you to serve him. And he's offering you an opportunity. So Jesus asked her for water, and she points out first a very earthly, obvious problem. And that is that you don't have anything to draw water with. Okay, that's a very, very valid point. And he says, will you give me something to drink? The Samaritan woman says to him, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for something to drink? So first of all, you shouldn't even be talking to me. Secondly, how are you going to even get the water? And then Jesus says, hey, if you knew who was talking to you, you'd give me something to drink. If you knew the full measure of what has just happened, what I have just invited you into, you would give me something to drink. So then, like most of us, when Jesus began to maybe engage her and begin to poke into her heart a little bit, she begins to engage him next in this theological debate. Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us his well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock? Oftentimes, in the midst of the heat of the day, in the midst of our struggles, in the midst of our sin, our default is to rely on the faith of someone or something else, rather than answering the voice of the one true God. Now, I said this first service, I want to say second service, I want to caution us. I'm not saying anything, there's anything wrong with us asking people to pray for them. I'm excited about this app that we're getting ready to launch. I went over this morning and asked the prayer team to pray for me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with prayer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sharing what's going on, sharing our struggles and our burdens with other people. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is oftentimes we do that as a way to gain encouragement and support from them rather than from Jesus. Because I can come to Linda and ask her to pray for me, and I can be ambiguous about what it is. I love those, how in the church we do the unspoken prayers, unspoken requests. I don't want to confess that I'm struggling with this. I don't want to confess that I hate this person or that I'm doing this. So I'm just going to have an unspoken. And I'm going to hope that somehow Linda's prayers are righteous enough to overcome my sin, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we come to somebody and we're in the heat of the day and we're trying to mask what's going on, but we want their faith and their hope and their belief because somehow that's going to make me feel better about my current circumstances. I found myself in these last few months, at times, the weight and the struggles and the burdens that I felt so overwhelming that I was oftentimes felt like I was on the verge of a true panic attack. Having been a paramedic and having to pick up patients who are struggling with legitimate panic attacks, I know how difficult those can be to overcome. Like there's really, it's actually up to you as the individual to calm yourself down. There's nothing you can do. You're either going to hyperventilate till you pass out or through some encouragement, you're going to have to calm yourself down. And I know how difficult that can be. But oftentimes we run to others because we want them to do that for us rather than recognizing that we have a God who is engaging us and inviting us and meeting us in the heat of the day and offering us an opportunity to engage him. Drawing from someone else's well is not going to quench your thirst. One of the things that we do as an organization is we teach rock climbing. And part of rock climbing involves you putting on the equipment and you climbing up a rock face. And since most of what we do is teach top rope rock climbing, once you climb up to the top, then your belayer lowers you back down. Now, we give everybody the spiel. The harness holds 5,000 pounds. The ropes will hold, 10,000 pounds. The carabiners will hold 20,000 pounds. But when you're climbing up the rock, you have a tremendous amount of control, right? Like you're climbing, so you're holding yourself to the rock. But the way you get back down is when you get to the top, your belayer says, okay, now just hold on to the rope and let go and lean back. And new people always ask the same question, are you sure this equipment's going to hold me? Yes, I'm completely sure. But until you have trust, until you experience the truth of letting go and leaning back and putting all your weight in the equipment, I can't make you believe that. No amount of faith I have in the equipment is going to make you trust it, right? It's going to take you testing and proving that. As Jesus begins to engage her and begins to reveal some truth to her, she immediately starts to have this response of going, hey, man, this living water that you're offering, I'll take it. How do I get it? I want it. And Jesus, this is the moment in which Jesus gets real. And this was the moment he got real with me. So as he and I began to have this conversation, and I'm like, okay, reveal to me, I want this. I want the hope, and I want to understand the plan and stuff like that. Jesus immediately begins to engage her in the truth of the matter. And he says to her, hey, okay, I'll give it to you. Go get your husband real quick. And she goes, oh, now notice this. Notice what she says. She goes, oh, I'm not married. We call that lying by omission, okay? Technically, she's right. She's not married. But the truth of what Jesus is trying to get at is, yes, you're not married. In fact, you've been married 5 times, and the person you're with now is not your husband. So let's just get to the root of what's really going on. She was legally accurate when she said, I'm not married. But again, most of us are the same way. We're reluctant to really, truly engage the truth of the depth of our depravity, right? This was a profound truth for me because it began to transition my prayer life from God change my circumstances to God change me. Help me begin to understand how my faults, my sinfulness, my desires have put me in this situation. It's real easy for me to blame somebody else. It's real easy for me to pray that certain circumstances work out. But at the same time, if I'm unwilling to deal with the heart matter that got me into this situation, I'm going to find myself in the heat of the day at a well down the road. But I need you to change me from the inside out. And Jesus does. He calls her out on it. Not in a condemning way, not in a judging way, but just simply invites her into an opportunity to do something in which she goes, oh, I'm going to have to admit a little bit here. Okay, well, I'm not married. And then Jesus goes, okay, yes, you're not married. In fact, let's get a little bit deeper into that. I love it because he says, you're right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is you have 5 husbands, and the man that you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. As soon as she realizes this, she begins to say, hey, you're a prophet. There's no doubt in my mind. Our ancestors worship on this mountain. You Jews claim that the place that we must worship is Jerusalem. And Jesus cuts to the heart of the matter, and he says, yet a time is coming and has come now when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers that the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth. The Lord has begun to reveal to me, Lenny, if you truly want to worship me, it starts with you and I getting to the truth of who you are and the truth of who I am and the truth of who you're not. How often do we deny the condition of our heart? How often do you and I sacrifice or trade ritual for relationship? We hide in the heat of the day. Back when I was in Scouts, when I was a teenager, one of the things that we used to love to do on trips is we would make pies and Dutch ovens. And so we were going to make this apple pie. And so we got all the ingredients together. We mixed it up. This was back before we had the modern day headlamps and stuff like that. So a lot of what you had to do it by campfire light. So we mixed everything up. We got it all together. I was super excited. I scooped some out. I went to bite into it. And I guess in the heat of the moment, in the darkness and everything, we had actually put pears instead of apples in the pie. Now, I hate the taste and the feel of pears in my mouth. I don't mind pear juice. I don't mind that. There's something about the texture of a pear that I don't like. And it ruined apple pie. And it ruined it because while this was an amazing pie, the truth of the filling was not real, right? I had been deceived. I want to go ahead and invite the band to come up. The Lord really began to unpack for me, Lenny, if you want to get to the truth of this, if you want to worship in spirit and truth, it's kind of like an apple pie. It's not just about the batter and the butter and everything. It's about the right filling. It's about you understanding truth. It's about you allowing me to engage your heart at a truth level and begin to feel that with the truth of who I am and the truth of who you can be, and begin to move out all of that stuff. The woman gets it. She immediately says, I know that the Messiah called Jesus is coming, and when he comes, he'll explain everything to us. And then Jesus declares, I am the one speaking to you. I am he. I love the song that we sang this morning, and one of the reasons I chose it is because I love the lyrics. It says, behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulder. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life, and now I know that it is finished.